Hi, curious friends. Welcome to the Building Your Best Brain podcast. If you've been following along, it's been a few weeks since I posted. And let me tell you, I have definitely felt like it's been a few weeks. I've been really missing and looking forward to posting on Building Your Best Brain podcast, being able to connect with you, learn together, dive into questions, get curious about things. And the reason behind this, which hopefully you can forgive me for, and if you can't, that's a whole side tangent we'll deal with another time, is that I'm writing my thesis. So I'm in my PhD in neuroscience, which is, I think, something I say almost every single podcast. And eventually I will stop, probably. And I am submitting my thesis at the end of May. So I've been busy writing, and as a part of that, right now it's May 11th. There's just been a bit of reshuffling in terms of what I'm prioritizing, what I'm putting energy to. And the podcast, unfortunately, for a few weeks took a bit of a back seat, but I'm happy to say that I'm making really great progress with my writing. And the experience itself has been super, super interesting. It definitely has not been super stressful or labor intensive or difficult like I thought it would be, but there was definitely a shift that had to happen once I stopped doing experiments. I was writing throughout doing my experiments, just little chunks here and there, which did help. It's amazing what you can do when you set a little bit of time aside to kind of chip away at a goal. But when I stopped doing experiments and shift to full writing, something did happen. I did have a big block that made it really difficult to sit down. But once I shifted that, it's been cool. It's been fun. I mean, it's certainly work, but it definitely hasn't felt like that, impossible elephant sitting on your chest thing. And so I don't want to talk about this too much. I definitely want to connect with you guys on this once I have my thesis submitted, because everything will be more solidified and I'll actually see if the inklings I have prove true after a few weeks of testing it out. But I want to continue with the inside out brain. So, the inside out brain, we are on episode 4 around this topic. It's this idea that our internal brain activity, our internal state, dictates how others respond around us. And the reason why I want to put out this Inside Out Brain series is because I am, yeah, a little bit sick and tired of hearing, and there's nothing malicious about what I'm saying right now. So if it comes off and triggers you, it's definitely something to dive in a little deeper because this is coming from a very loving place. But this whole thing of like, I can't control my external environment and getting into that place of victimhood or feeling like there's absolutely nothing you can do to make a situation better. And what I've been finding, right, and I found this in my own journey, and it's something that I fall into still, despite being on top of it. And every time I catch it, I reward myself because I'm like, it means I'm ready to shift it, which is great. So we're not beating ourselves up to be better because that doesn't really work. But basically, it leaves us to a place of helplessness, victimhood, that there's nothing in our control when it comes to how people respond to us, when it comes to how we're treated, when it comes to, who gets promoted at work and who doesn't get promoted at work, when it comes to if your partner is going to plan a really special date night for you, or are you going to keep nagging him or her about doing the dishes, right? And we have so much resources at our fingertips, especially in the neuroscience field, that show that we have a lot of agency. And when I got my diagnosis of bipolar type 2, I was put on medication and did intensive therapy. I fought this a bit because I felt like there was always going to be something wrong with me. I was always going to be outside of the normal. I was always going to be broken, basically. And it was more so about managing my symptoms than actually being the person that I wanted to be. And the inside out brain, knowing some of these things and some of these concepts can go one or two ways. It can be like, oh, great, everything that's happened to me is my fault. Please do your best to not go that way. And if you do go down that way, it's perfect. There are things to learn there for sure. But it is incredibly empowering. Incredibly, incredibly empowering. And so, if you haven't caught up on those episodes, I invite you to do so. We have an introduction episode where I talk about it more in depth. We talk about body language and facial expressions when it comes to inside out brain. So, how people respond to you based off how you hold yourself. And then the last one, which I really, really liked, was around beliefs and how beliefs can impact how others see you, perceive you, and respond to you. And the one that I want to talk about today, kind of diving back in to the podcast recordings, is a really juicy one, which is around thoughts. Your thoughts, how they dictate the world around you. And some of you have maybe heard this before. I feel like it's not presented in the science space so much, the neuroscience space, although people are doing work, which I'll share with you some of this work to bridge this gap. But it's very spiritual, right? Very spiritual, manifesting in terms of, your thoughts create your reality, right? Your thoughts create your reality. But what I want to share is more around how your thoughts impact the thoughts of others. Because how empowering is it? And we'll have a full circle moment, I promise, but how empowering is it to be able to guide people on perceiving you, right? So basically perceiving being, first impressions or initial impressions, right? Being able to guide people on how you want them to initially perceive you and how you want to be received. So the examples I'll give will be around the career area of life because being in academia, I've given a ton of presentations, and that is going to be something that I do for the rest of my life. And really, with the work I do, right, on the podcast, as well as the work I do with people, I'm giving a lot of information. I'm always presenting a lot of information and teaching. So I'll use some of those examples of how my thoughts have impacted how people have perceived me and received me. But there are many, many scenarios which we likely are hoping for a certain direction when it comes to how we're perceived and received, right? We think about our family, we can think about our partner, we can even think about, if you go to a barista or you go to a coffee shop and you get a latte and they accidentally made you a cortado or they put hazelnut in it or something, and you're going back to ask for a redo, you likely are hoping for a certain outcome or to be received in a certain way, right? So keeping that in mind, stick around. We will unpack a little bit about how thoughts impact the world around us. So, as I mentioned, I'm in my PhD in neuroscience. I did a master's in neuroscience and I worked in industry for 2 years in between. And we give presentations all the time. It's how the scientific community grows. It's how we're able to foster collaborations, right? So convince people to work with us. In some cases, in a lot of cases, it's a way to convince people to fund us, right? So to put money towards our projects, to think that our projects are worthwhile. And then as a scientist or as a person, a teacher that is presenting this information, we also want other people's input for potential blind spots we have, or to make the project stronger, right? A big part of science, which might not be super common knowledge, is peer review. Everything we're doing is constantly being reviewed and is constantly being, this is not the most positive word, but criticized and put through the ringer, not because not because people don't like you, but because that is how you get a really great, whether it's product or therapeutic or, theory really fleshed out and understood the best that we can with the tools we have now. And something I noticed when I would prepare for my presentations, often I would say maybe a few hours before my presentation, and this happened throughout my master's, this even happened towards the beginning of my PhD. I would often have random questions that pop up, right? So I would make my little PowerPoint slides and, I would read relevant articles. I would practice a few times what I was going to say. And I would usually have some questions prepared, right? Like I would think about who my audience is. Is it scientists? What kind of field are they in? What background do they have? And I would often think about what questions they would ask so that I could have the answers prepared. And an hour or two before my presentation, I would often have a random question pop up in my brain, one that I hadn't put on the list yet. And as I was, getting ready for the presentation or doing whatever it is that I was doing, I would often think, oh, I hope they don't ask me that. And anybody that has done these kind of presentations before and has prepared presentations like I've prepared presentations, I'm sure has had this where you just have this random thought that pops up, this random question, and you go, okay, well, I need to do this, that, the other thing. I don't have time, which in theory I did. I could have made the time, but in my mind, I was like, I don't have the time. I just pray that they don't ask that. And every single time, without fail, somebody would ask me that question. And I'd go, that's a good question. It's actually something I thought about before. I don't know the answer, essentially. And I'm not saying that there's any science behind people being able to pull out specific thoughts out of your brain into their brain. As of right now, there's no science to support that notion, but there is something to right before a presentation having that thought, that kind of anxiety thought around, I really hope nobody does blank. And carrying that with you, I had a sneaking suspicion that maybe there was something to that. And I found out that was true and did some more digging based off of a really positive experience that I had. So, we, as the lab that I'm in currently, we do a lot of collaborations with people in computer science. So, we're what we call in science a wet lab, right? So, we work we cells, with animals, we wear white coats, we do experiments. And we have a collaboration with another group at McGill who are very computer science heavy. So their version of lab and experiments is they're sitting in front of a computer going through data sets. The computers are humming. They're doing lots of work. They're sitting in one place. And we had a really incredible professor from Japan visit us, and he's like one of the best in the field, and he does a lot of this merging, right? Himself and his group, he would have both lab spaces, right? So he has an incredible team that does wet lab experiments with animals and cells, and then he has another team all under the same professor that does these big computational models, data analysis, all that good stuff. So he comes to Montreal, and we're always, my professor in particular, he's always very good when it comes to hosting, right? So when somebody is coming to visit, he's always does a good job at planning a great itinerary. We all go for a meal together. They do something cultural in Montreal. Montreal's a fun city, by the way. If you need any recommendations ever, just let me know. And one of the things on the list was for our group and then this computer science group to meet and talk about science together. And my supervisor, he prepared a little presentation with like a general overview of what we do in the lab. And the Japanese professor did the same thing, showed some exciting stuff on his end. And then the computer science professor did the same thing. And there was some time left over before classic grad school pizza, before the pizza arrived. That's how you get us to come to presentations. You give us pizza after. Doesn't matter how good the pizza is, we will be there. So there was a bit of time. And by a bit of time, I mean not like 20 minutes, 30 minutes. There was an hour left. And the computer science professor turns to my supervisor and says, "Why don't one of your senior students?" This was 2 years ago when I was senior. I was in my third year at the time. I'm now in my fifth, and we're almost done. I won't be able to say that longer, guys. Sorry. I'm like being so annoying, sneaking it in there every chance I get. A topic for another time. He goes, "Well, why don't you get one of your senior students to present their work, like maybe Sylvie?" And then he listed, there was two other people in the lab who had been there for 2, 3 years. And I had no time to prepare anything. And lucky for me, my supervisor and I, we were working on figures for a paper we were trying to submit, which just means that he happened to have in his inbox, graphs and images that were assembled in a nice way that were for my project to potentially be published in a journal. And I had no time to think about what questions people would ask me. I didn't read any papers. I didn't practice anything. And I kind of just said, "Oh, okay, sure." And I asked my supervisor to put the figures up on the PowerPoint. And I just started talking. And I was like, we went through a few panels. I didn't present everything. And it was interesting because it was the most smooth, easy presentation I've truly ever given. And what was even more interesting was I couldn't tell with my supervisor if he was just relieved, but he was very happy. He was very happy about the presentation, how it went. I could tell that he was really grateful and appreciative. And there was a few postdocs in the lab. So postdocs are people who have PhDs that are continuing to study research under a university, under a professor. And they had a lot of great questions about the project. They thought it was really promising. And I even had a postdoc say, kind of like in a cheeky way, like, "Oh, you're just always ready to present your project." And it actually started, or it continued to develop. It kind of was already in the beginning stages with the Japanese professor to collaborate with me for my project, which was really incredible. And it's something that I believe if I had the time to prepare and if I was writing down all the questions and had questions pop up last minute and didn't, get them regulated or answered in my brain, that information would not have been as well received. And so I wanted to dive into, which I'll share with you now, what is it behind our thoughts that impacts how other people respond to us? And if there's a bit of science behind this, what can we do to help shift it? Because basically, what I was experiencing was my brain being a broadcast station, right? So the way that my thoughts were in my brain, which we don't know, the way that I suppose it's best described right now in terms of where our thoughts in your brain is that thoughts are associated with brain activity. And so while we don't have a specific area in our brain where we can say all of our thoughts go here, or all of our thoughts activate this, we can assume that thoughts will light up different areas of the brain. The brain will fire at different rates, right? Which means that the brain waves will be different, and that can be associated with different states, both mentally and physically. So your thoughts are impacting how your brain is firing, and that is broadcasting to everybody that is in the room, whether they know it or not, right? So thinking of, when you're listening to a radio station, even if you're listening to it in the background, you're not listening to more than one station at a time, right? So when you're presenting to a room and have your thoughts either kind of shortly before or during the presentation, right? Who's given a presentation where you're just like in your mind holding on to dear life, hoping that it'll go okay. And you're like, oh, I hope nothing goes bad. I hope they don't ask those questions. I hope that, I make the time. I hope that they understand, right? That is getting broadcasted as you're speaking to the room. And there is kind of two fields of study that show that this is true. And one of them is called interbrain coupling. This is where your brain synchronizes with someone else's brain. And there's been a lot of studies that have looked at this in many different contexts, but there's a recent study that has pulled a bunch of studies together. And we call this a meta-analysis, where it's just an analysis of a bunch of individual analyses and investigations. And it's interesting because all these papers use different ways of measuring brain activity, right? So you can look at EEG, which if you know me, you know that I love EEG. I have them at home. I use them with people to help rewire stubborn circuits. That measures brain wave activity. People have looked at this in the context of fMRIs, which is looking at activity based off of metabolism, right? So it looks at kind of blood oxygen levels at different areas of the brain. And you can even look at what we call fNIRS. And this looks more at blood flow, but it's not the same as fMRI, where you're like in a really big scanner and you get really great, what we call white to gray matter resolution. It looks more at blood flow. Anyway, pooling all these things together, they've seen in certain activities in particular, which is really interesting, that people will have these brief periods of brain wave synchronization where parts of the brain are active together at the same time and at the same frequency. And that happens when people have shared attention towards something. Music is a really great one. Cooperation, decision making, as well as a speech situation. And what's interesting is that often when two people's brains are deeply engaged in something or aligned in something, the scores in terms of like overall satisfaction or the ability to understand each other or the ability of like heightened cooperation is higher. And there's a group that studies this in a more specific context, a more social context, which I think is super interesting and really relevant when it comes to our thoughts and how it influences how people perceive us and receive us, is the speaker listener synchronization, which is a very social situation, right? We're looking at two or multiple people's brains and how they interact with each other and how they're influenced by each other. And it's interesting because there's a group called Yuri Hansen, right? So he's the professor, and I'll share a link to his lab because he does a lot of different studies on this. But he looks at that brain wave synchronization as well. And what's cool is that it seems as a listener, depending on the speaker, that their brain waves change even in anticipation of what the person is saying. And so it's very cool because it goes back to that analogy of our thoughts being a broadcast and how the words you're saying is one part of the story. And that depending on what you're broadcasting, it's almost like a radio playing on in the background for other people. And so what's interesting is that the better that this is coupled, so if you have a speaker that is present, let's say an ideal situation is present, is passionate, is connected to what they're saying, and is confident, they're likely going to have a very not erratic, very synchronous. You might even have increased alpha brain waves, right? That's associated with relaxation, reflection, or low beta, right? So beta is associated with attention and learning, but on the lower side, the lower frequency, it's also associated with emotional regulation. You're having that smooth cadence, you have those smooth, synchronous brain wave activities, and your audience is right along with you, syncing up with you, being able to better understand what you're saying because of it. And this is something that I know, knowing this information has benefited my relationship a lot. If I'm coming to my partner and I want a conversation to go a certain way, not even necessarily that, let's say I want him to take my side, because sometimes that happens, right? We're like, it'd be really great if you just agreed with everything I said right now. But let's say the objective is to come towards a solution, right? If I'm coming in rigid, hoping that he doesn't say this or suggest this solution, or, I'm worried that he's going to like poke holes or whatever it may be, if I'm coming in with a lot of worry and anxiety and rigidity, those are often the times, no matter how clear my words are, and my words are quite clear. It is something that I have worked on for a long time, but it's something that I feel like I've been naturally given is just a clear voice. Yeah, doesn't matter how clear I am with my words. He might not understand, and he's very smart. He might not understand because he's listening to that radio station I have on in the background that's like erratic waves, Fear FM, just not understanding what I'm putting down, even though the words are super clear. And so, just so that nobody misunderstands what I'm saying, I'm not saying that science is able to show that your thoughts can be transplanted in the brain of somebody else. But it does show that our internal state, how our brain activity is shifting, which our thoughts can do, our thoughts do shape our brain activity. That does synchronize with other people, and that does impact how they receive you. And so, with that in mind, what do we do with this information? If anything, if you're happy knowing this and you can take it to trivia night, happy to contribute to your trivia night. If you're looking to take this so that you can improve how you present information when it comes to your job, how to convince your kids to do something they don't want to do, like let's say eat broccoli, how to boost your relationship with your partner. Communication skills, right, are so, so key. What helps before you come to a conversation is to do what I like to call a thought cleanup, which is what are the thoughts that are reoccurring over and over again in your brain about this conversation, presentation, conflict, meeting, whatever it may be. Especially when you're in a place that you are the speaker, right? Or you're the person coming to the other person to present a solution or to present a problem or to present a new perspective. Doing this thought cleanup of getting the thoughts that are maybe top three most reoccurring thoughts will paint a really clear picture of where your brain is at and what your brain is likely going to be thinking, even if you're not conscious of it, during the time of that conversation. And starting to explore ways to shift it, ways to neutralize it, ways to dump it, maybe doing actions or reminding yourself of evidence that shows you the opposite. But putting in that little bit of work, it's not a lot of work. It's, maybe 10, 15, 20 minutes of work that can really make a difference between a conversation that gets you nowhere or gets you in a worse situation than before, digs you in a deeper hole, versus a conversation that really propels you forward, gains momentum. And as we know here, anytime that we're able to gain momentum in the brain and start to notice how we're gaining momentum, it just spirals positive snowball effect. So that's my recommendation. If you have any questions or comments or reflections about any of the science or any of the actions that I recommend, don't be shy to leave a comment. There's going to be lots of great resources in the show notes as well, some of the papers I suggested. And one way to really integrate this information, if this episode really speaks to you, is to join my email list to be able to attend my webinars. These are called Pick My Brain webinars. Sometimes the topics change, but they're often associated to what we're talking about on the podcast, where I'll dive a little bit deeper. But really, it's there to help answer your questions so that the information is easier to apply. Again, it's wonderful to be able to learn things. We're definitely in an era of a lot of information, which has its pros and cons. But the ability to apply the information to, again, increase that agency and start seeing shifts and improvements in your life right now is really what building your best brain is all about. And it's not going to be the same for everyone because we all come in with different brains, we all come in with different experiences. So you can look in the show notes to sign up for my email list to be able to attend the live webinars. If you can't attend live, you can always have access to the replay and submit your questions virtually. But that would say would be the best place to start integrating this information so that you are better perceived and received in the world. If you made it to the end, congratulations. I look forward to connecting with you guys soon. We have at least one more Inside Out Brain podcast episode, maybe another, depending on how people are vibing with this information, what questions arise from this information. And then we will transition to a new topic that I'm really excited about, but I'm going to keep it under wraps because it's good to be focused. Anyways, I super appreciate you being here and I look forward to connecting with you soon. Have a wonderful rest of your day.